Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Olson with the National Tile Contractors Association. I hope all of you are doing well. It's blizzarding here in Minnesota, and but it's nice to be able to welcome you for these webinars that we're doing. I know your schedules are busy, so thank you for coming out today. Today's webinar is titled Self-Leveling Underlayments, Flowable Hydraulic Cement Underlayment Standards, and is sponsored and presented by MAPEI. Before I introduce today's speaker, I want to remind you of a little bit of business. We will be muted, so please type your questions into the questions area on your computer today, and we'll answer your questions at the end of this presentation. If the audio on your computer is poor, call the number on the invite to this webinar and listen on your phone. As a reminder, all of our webinars are available to watch at any time on the NTCA YouTube channel. They should be on the YouTube channel within 72 hours after this webinar is finished. If you go there, you'll get easy access to watch and or share all of our current and past programs at your convenience. All right, I'm really happy to again introduce Logan Reavis. He is the manager of technical services at MAPEI. Logan has been with MAPEI for over 5 years and is responsible for the product support department, the architectural support department, and the regional field representatives. Logan grew up around floor covering. Shortly after he completed his Bachelor of Business Administration degree from the University of Texas at Arlington, he began his career in the industry. He brings over 16 years of experience in floor covering after spending time in distribution and on the flooring contractor side of the business. Welcome, Logan. Look forward to your program.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate that. It's a little less blizzardy down here in South Florida. I think it's somewhere in the low 80s today, but I guess, again, this is the time of year everybody wants to be here. So, but hope everybody that is having bad weather here, hope everything's all right and you stay warm. Thank you for the introduction. As you mentioned, today we're going to talk about self-leveling underlayments, or is it flowable hydraulic cement underlayment, which again is a new term for me, and we'll kind of get into a little bit of how we ended up with that term and why that's being paired with the term self-leveling underlayment and the new standards that have been released by Ansi and that are now a part of our world here in the tile industry. So when we talk about self-leveling and what a self-leveling compound is, I mean, traditionally, as Jim mentioned, my background came in from working in distribution and on the floor covering side, and so it's not all that new of an idea, and it's really kind of where these products kind of had their genesis was, and original acceptance was on the floor covering side, and especially with resilience and things like that. And so it's not exactly a new idea for tile, but it's a newer product to the industry and something that's becoming more and more accepted. So we'll spend a little bit of time on the basics as well as kind of digging into the new standards and what they mean. So traditionally, you've got a cement or gypsum based product, and so the idea being you add a fair amount of water to it so that it's flowable, that you can pour it out, and it basically kind of takes care of itself as far as correcting your substrate and getting you something that you can install over. And so it's designed for you to, again, pour it out, be able to work on it, in it, around it, and get it placed, and anywhere from pulling it to a feather edge and up to as much as 2 inches in a single application. And then there's even more kind of technical and complicated applications where you can extend it even deeper and add aggregate, for those sorts of applications. And so again, that's not a new idea, and this is as you wonder, okay, I mean, we went years and years in the tile industry without needing self-levelers. Why now? Why are we spending time on standards? Why why do we need these products, and what good do they do for me, and why should I be familiar with them? And if you look at this is a really good illustration. As you might be wondering if this is some weird topographical map from the Amazon running into the Andes Mountains or something in South America. It's not. I mean, this is actually a laser shot topographical map of a subfloor, and it shows the sorts of variations that can show up in a subfloor, and and this is what you have no control over as a tile contractor. You never know what you're going to be handed, and this is an extreme instance. I mean, it's showing anywhere from the high point to as much as 2¼ inches of variance over, and this is a 160 by 60 foot section, so almost 10,000 square feet. But again, these are the challenges. You show up on a job, this is what you're handed, and you're told to install your finished material. And obviously we're talking about tile, and and this is nothing new. I mean, tile installers have been handed bad slabs for years, but there are a lot of things that have changed in the industry. And so when we talk about why do we use self-levelers, the guy on the left here, the installer on the left, is using a skim coat product, and that's something you associate more with resilience, the floor covering side of the business, trying to get that perfectly smooth type floor. But certainly the tile guy down on the bottom, packing in mud and screeding, and that's certainly not a new idea to the industry here. But in both instances, you're on your knees. In both instances, it's very time-consuming, labor-intensive, and ultimately, what's really difficult when smoothing is one thing, and you can gauge how smooth and kind of in general how flat the floor is right in front of you, but it's really difficult to control that over a large area as you go. And so are you really achieving what you need to achieve by the time you do a large space? And so the need for products that would help cover larger areas and require less labor have again, it's not a new idea, but it's just it's something that we've had to kind of get introduced to and get comfortable with, and and see how to work that on the tile side of the business. So I mentioned the word flat, and when we talk about what we're trying to really achieve here when we're prepping these substrates, and so if I'm showing you the topographical map of a subfloor that is all over the place, I mean, why is it important? What's the big deal? Why can't we just use traditional methods? Like I said, things have changed in the tile industry. Tiles are getting bigger, and rectangles and are kind of the standard shape now. And that may sound silly, but again, I mean, I realize squares are rectangles, but that's not the kind of rectangle I'm talking about. I'm talking about the one side is longer than the other, and and we'll talk more about why that's important. And I mean, that's just kind of the standard now. Tiles are either really big or really small. We've got gauge porcelain tiles now, and panels and slabs, and as thin as a couple millimeters, 3 millimeters, and but as thick as 30 millimeters on porcelain slabs. And it's just a whole different ball game. These products, you get into some of these the gauge porcelain panels. They're very flexible, and traditionally that's not really what tile's been thought of. Tile's kind of been thought of as kind of a beefier kind of a rigid durable product, and so the idea of a giant flexible sheet of porcelain is just, it's a little bit different thought process when it comes to thinking about tile and the products we're having to work with and install. So when I when I talk about rectangles and, you know, why on earth why am I worried about rectangles? Who cares? You know, again, with the popularity of plank tiles now, I mean, not just, you know, I mean, 12 by 24 porcelain tile seems to be kind of the standard now. You know, that's the new 8 by 8 or 12 by 12 market is as a 12 by 24. But planks, I mean, now you're talking about you know, a rectangular shaped tile that, you know, could be as long as 48, or I mean, you see, I mean, even much more extreme instances of 72-inch plank tiles. And you know, tiles, because of the way they're manufactured, you get a bow in them, and it's allowed by the manufacturing standards. And so when you get that bow, it's typically, you know, you get that shape you see here on the screen, and so where it's higher in the middle, and that's why the industry doesn't recommend for anything more than a 33% offset. And you know, it's because if you're lining up the highest point of the tile with the lowest point of the tile in a true 50-50 brick pattern, you know, you're already setting yourself up for lippage. And you know, and that's one of the biggest issues we run into. It causes problems, you know, obviously aesthetic, but you know, people catch their toes on it, catch their feet on it. It's noticeable, and it honestly makes grouting a challenge, and being consistent in color and things like that. So if your substrate is not flat, it's that much more difficult for you to be successful in having a lippage-free installation. So if we're talking about flat and we're trying to determine what does flat mean, and we'll get into the standards here in our industry and rehash that as far as, well, what do we need to achieve? But you know, again, talking about what are we being handed? What is the slab or the subfloor that you're getting? And when we talk about a flat substrate, you know, a flat concrete substrate, you think about, okay, we talk about how much variation we can have over 10 feet and over 2 feet, and talk about a 1/4 of an inch or an 1/8 of an inch. They use the FF floor flatness numbers as far as their specifications, and then ultimately what the concrete contractor is held to. And so this is not a direct correlation exact. I mean, there's no scientific, I guess, we don't have anything that guarantees you that that an FF of 25 is exactly a 1/4 inch max drop for 10 feet. But you know, it gives you kind of a gauge as to what we're dealing with here. And so when you see that a conventional slab with an FF of 20 doesn't even achieve that, which, you know, with these larger tiles, we're looking for that 1/8 of an inch number. You know, you're doubling the FF number, and it's something that's considered very flat, beyond very flat, almost approaching super flat in the concrete industry. So, you know, but it's, hey, it's 2022. We get on our phone, we order anything we need, and you know, it shows up to our house a day or two later, thanks to Amazon. So we just say, all right, well, we'll just order a really flat slab. And so if we can get somebody to say, all right, well, we need an FF of 50, that should get us right around where we're wanting to be. So we should be good for our tile installation. So a couple other things though, when you do consider FF numbers and how that's measured, they're usually going to measure that within 72 hours of the slab being placed. And so, and we all know, you know, as far as our industry and what we ask for, or what's required for concrete slabs, for tile installation, for direct bonding, you know, you're looking at 28 days before you can install on that slab. So you know, every schedule is different on every job site. I mean, look, this slab could be, even if it's new construction, could be 1.5 years old by the time you get on it. I mean, they could be pushing you to try to get on it before 28 days. But during that 28 days, you get a lot of the drying occurs in that first 28 days, and concrete tends to move, it tends to shrink. And that's the reason we don't want to be on it yet. But during that movement, you also get what's called curling. So you get movement in, a slab that might have been finished to, an FF of 50. You can easily see as much as a 10-point erosion against that number by the time you're handed that slab. So even if you're on a project where it was specified, you may not be handed that by the time you get there. And even if it checked out and met those standards at the time it was measured. So again, we've talked a little bit about what we need, and going back to Ansi A108.02, and again, most of the tiles we're dealing with have this, at least one edge of 15 inches. I mean, that's just kind of where we're at in the industry and have been for a while. And it seems like it's either that or it's a really small tile, and so like a mosaic. And this is just what we have to deal with. So we're always looking for that 1/8 of an inch over 10 feet. And then what's really, can be difficult, and especially in some applications, is that 1/16 of an inch and 2 feet. And so, but this is what our industry standards call for. This is what we're looking for. And so, for tile contractors, this is what flat means, is do we have this? And so, so what if you're more in residential? I mean, if you're doing a lot of that type of work, multifamily, if you've got wood substrates, again, same standards as far as the numbers. I mean, the 1/8 of an inch and the 1/16 of an inch over 2 feet. And this is really a challenge, that 1/16 of an inch over 2 feet, because of the joists. It oftentimes doesn't feel like they're paying more attention to detail for you as we move forward in time with construction practices. They're always wanting to push the joists out a little bit further, and and value engineer the type of products that they're going to put down to create their decking. And these products can be reactive to moisture. The joists might not be perfectly level, but again, I mean, by the time they put all this down and you're standing on it and ready to get going on your tile installation, it's really unlikely that they've achieved the requirements that we have for substrate flatness. So this brings us kind of back to self-leveling and why the tile industry has gotten involved, and why we have these new standards. And so generally speaking, you've got a couple different types of self-leveling underlayments that are out there. You got gypsum based products that are not actually included in this standard, and then the cement based that are either Portland cement or typically calcium aluminate cement based. And so and we'll talk about those here with the standard. So existing standards that are out there, just so you know, there is the ASTM F2873. So this, as you can see, it is specific to self-leveling to receive resilient flooring. There, again, I mentioned at the beginning, this is has been a long accepted type of product for that side of the business. It's long been understood because of the just the nature of the installation. I mean, it's a thin, resilient surface that really needs something pretty much perfectly smooth and flat, or you're going to see it telegraphing through the product, and which is obviously unacceptable. And so there are other standards out there, and some of the same different ASTM tests and things that you will see in this 2873 are included in the Ansi standards for tile. So Ansi, I introduced to you Ansi 118.16. So this is your product standard, and this is your product standard for flowable hydraulic cement underlayment / self-leveling underlayment. Again, for somebody who's been in this industry a long time, it's going to be really hard for me to ever call them anything other than a self-leveler or a SLU. The flowable hydraulic cement underlayment, though, has come about because of our industry and the interest we take in building a consensus and to get these standards approved. You know, there's some terminology in there that we'll get more into here that maybe shed a little bit more light onto why do we need a double named / product standard. And it's so I think at the end of the day, what you'll see is flowable hydraulic cement underlayment is probably a more accurate term. But at the same time, what we don't want to do is create a standard for a product nobody on earth knows what it is. So we also leave the self-leveling underlayment on there. But again, I'll hopefully shed a little more light on that here as we go. So flowable hydraulic cement underlayment, self-leveling underlayment. So it is intended to be used in the flattening the underlying horizontal substrates of the work of others in preparation for installing tiles and natural stone. So we give a real kind of concise, the general definition here that is clear that we're getting ready to install tile and stone. The 118.16 standard, it breaks more these products into two categories. You've got a standard setting and a rapid hardening. Then they have their own testing requirements. So standard setting that is basically means it achieves the minimum within 24 hours, whereas a rapid hardening is the same type of product, except it is designed to be open to traffic and installation quicker and obtain the minimum required compressive strengths at a much faster rate. And so, you know, the testing. So the testing for standard setting, you know, they have their own property requirement tables within the standard, and all the test procedures. If you've ever read through an Ansi product standard, I mean, that's the bulk of what it is. I mean, other than where it kind of lays out what it's, you know, the scope and what it's talking, you know, and gives definitions, you know, of the products that it's designed to test. It's really just test methods. And so, you know, when you're someone like me who's more interested in just the actual application, you know, it can be a little hard to follow at times, and a little complicated. But essentially, what they're looking for is on the standard setting, they're looking for the minimum of 6.9 megapascals or around 1,000 psi compressive strength at 24 hours, whereas with the rapid hardening products, you're looking for that same number within 4 hours. All right, and then the tensile bond strength on the you know, how well basically it's stuck to the floor, you're testing that at 48 hours on the standard setting and 24 hours on the rapid hardening. And so again, there's a lot here within the standard, but those are the two big categories. Is you know, is it a product that basically it's designed to pour and then you're setting tile on it the next day, or is it a product that's designed to be poured and you're setting tile on it within a couple hours? Which leads us to the installation standard. So A108.21. So we are now at A108.21. So after last year with the exterior gauge porcelain tile installation standards, got us to the 20s. We are marching on, and we are now at A108.21. And so this is your installation standard. And so again, this just kind of goes through and it kind of lays out, you know, what are we trying to achieve here, you know, and that it's specific to our industry for installing tile, and you know, and then you'll notice most importantly is their ability to form in the second paragraph, is their ability to form a flat surface with a high compressive strength. And so You'll notice the word flat keeps coming up, and when I talk about why the term self-leveling has caused some issues, this is where you start to kind of see it. I mean, again, all the standards we've talked about and what we're needing to achieve for a tile installation, the word flat comes up over and over. And what we have not yet seen is the term level. And so, you know, and there's a difference, and it's caused problems for contractors in the past when you get somebody who wants to split hairs and you know, and what the expectations are on site. So here within the installation standard, it is spelled out, and this is right at the beginning. And so substrate flattening, and then we will also talk about substrate leveling. So substrate flattening, the intended use of flowable hydraulic cement underlayment, self-leveling underlayment, is to flatten the substrate to meet the tile industry's required flatness tolerances and help reduce the substrate's contribution to tile lippage. If the underlayment is specified for leveling to designated elevations, this intent needs to be clearly expressed in the project specification in all applicable sections along with elevations and tolerances. So this is kind of the crux of it. And so what we want to be clear about is that if you've bid a job and you've included you know, your prep in it, you know, what you're bidding is you're trying to achieve flat, and you're not necessarily trying to achieve level. And so, because again, I don't, you know, we install tile over pitch surfaces all the time. You know, whether a substrate is level is not really the issue for us. Again, we're concerned about how flat the substrate is. So substrate leveling. So as we define that, substrate flattening is the intended, just to reiterate, substrate flattening is the intended use for these products. Leveling is a specialized use of these products that requires extensive surveying, pinning, detail elevation variations, and basically saying that, you know, if you're going to actually try to level a large area, you're probably going to use a lot of product, and you know, it can create other issues as far as heights and with adjacent spaces. You know, you're getting into more technical pours. Again, if you're needing to add aggregate or multiple lifts, and so now you're really kind of extending out the time period that you're working in, and so it's and that was kind of the big concern is, and that's where the hang up on the word self-leveling has kind of come from. And you know, and it's a valid argument. Again, it's and what we've done, I think the industry has done here is done a good job of spelling it out, and I think this is really contractor-friendly language as far as you know, just trying to really be clear what we're doing here and what the expectation should be. So as far as the types of substrates that generally you're dealing with here, you know, again, these products, so with concrete, we reference ASTM F710 on the floor covering side of the industry. So there's lots of materials out there, lots of written materials out there about you know, prepping substrates, and ASTM F710 is often referenced on that side, as well as the ACI 302.2 R06 guide. And so wood subfloors, gypsum poured slabs, again, you know, but these ASTMs that are out there, they all kind of go back to resilient flooring. And so but you'll see those referenced out there, but I don't want it to sound like, I mean, again, while these products have not been used for as long in the tile industry, it's not as if the tile industry has ignored these products. And so If you look in the TCNA handbook, we've got methods for both F200 and 205, along with their A versions for elevated, above ground concrete with a poured gypsum underlayment, membranes, tile installations over the top, cementitious self-leveling underlayments. So again, these have been there, but what we didn't have was we didn't have product standards like we call out in these methods for just about everything else that's involved. So for instance, if you're putting a waterproofing membrane and you're calling out Ansi 118.10, you're calling out an Ansi designation for the mortar and for the grout. So now we have an Ansi designation for the mortar, for the underlayment, as well as an installation document standard for it as well. So again, I'm showing you this, and then we have F180 and F185 within the handbook. And as far as installing these types of products over wood. So again, this is not brand new. This is not, the point of this is not to suggest that, tile, we just haven't used levelers or we didn't know what to do with them before. I mean, obviously they've been around and become very widely accepted. It's again, it's getting to the point where we can call it out and we have these standards, and then you have the installation standard to support you and what you're trying to achieve. So as we kind of hop into just sort of a general review and best practices, and these are ideas that are referenced within the standard, the 108.21 installation standard. You need to be aware of if these products are moisture sensitive. That's not always been a concern in the tile industry, but certainly, as these introduction of more and more membranes over the years and the different products that are used within the installation, it's something that has had to become more top of mind. And so, generally speaking, Portland cement, calcium aluminum cement is not really affected by moisture, but there are so many other materials that go into these products as far as the types of polymers that are used and different and aggregates and just the magic pixie dust that allows you to be able to pour these things and then run out like water, but then turn around and set up and are ready to take a tile floor in a couple hours. There's things in there that can be moisture sensitive, and so it's just something you need to be aware of. There are products, self-leveling underlayments that are made, that you don't have to worry about it. I mean, as long as there's not a puddle on the floor, you don't have to worry, and it can be exposed to an open job site. But that's something that you need to be aware of and check in advance. And so obviously the structural integrity of the substrate, I mean, that's the big one. You're only as good as what you're bonding to. So obviously we're trying to get it flat, but if it's not flat because it's falling apart, then you've got a bigger problem there. So we're always looking for anything that could be a bond breaker. At the end of the day, you're capping your substrate, and if you can't hold on to it, then you're going to have issues. If your leveler pops off the substrate underneath your tile installation, it's going to sound hollow, and you're going to run the risk of it cracking. So especially in wood substrates, or if you're ever working above occupied space, anytime you're going to pour a leveler, you really want to pay attention to make sure you're filling any holes or voids. It's not a good feeling when you're pouring leveler and you've got a lot of it down on the floor and you see a whirlpool and you're not really sure where it's going. Surface profile of the concrete. So again, this is just being familiar with the product you're using. Making sure you're reading the data sheet. You're talking to the manufacturer's rep, your distributor, whoever you trust that you get these products from, and make sure you know how that floor needs to be prepped in advance and that you've done it correctly. And then again, like I said, there are products that don't need a conditioned space, but there are products that do, and that's a big deal in the tile industry because, again, while some of these industries, like on the floor covering side, or certainly in wood flooring, they've learned the hard way that they need a conditioned space, and so that's generally accepted. But my experience on the tile side is they pretty much don't care when the tile guy comes in. They'll throw you out there with, it's usually there's hardly any lighting. It's not completely closed in. The HVAC's pretty much never functional, and so but nobody ever worries about the tile guy, unfortunately. So I mentioned moisture. Again, if you do have moisture sensitive products you're working with, there are lots of different options on the market for you to take care of that. 2-component epoxies, there is an ASTM standard for that, the F3010. We've got single component water-based solutions that they have limitations, but they're really easy as far as application and double as a primer. You've got single component polyurethane products that are 100% solids that can help control the moisture, and then with a sand broadcast or an appropriate primer that can be leveled over. So we mentioned profile. So again, this is where you just need to know what you're dealing with. What is it? Is it a product that requires a concrete surface profile of 2 to 3? Is it a product that does not require a concrete surface profile of a certain level? I mean, again, just know what you're getting into so that you can plan accordingly. Shot blasting has long been one of our favorites in the industry because it does such a good job of not only of basically pulverizing the top level of the concrete. It evacuates that dust and debris very, very well, and so that it doesn't leave anything behind, and then it gives you a really clean concrete to bond to. Scarification, that's one that, look, you don't see it as much, and you can, if somebody goes crazy with any of these products, you can really damage the concrete. But and then grinding, so certainly grinders are nothing new to the tile industry. But you do need to be careful when you're grinding. At some point, you're basically you can go from grinding to polishing, and it's also, again, it's really important when you're tearing off the top surface of the concrete, to create a bondable surface. You need to make sure that that's evacuated out as much as possible, and that you're not just tearing it off and pushing it down into the concrete pores and creating a surface that's even more difficult to bond to. So where do we drain this stuff up? So ICRI, the International Concrete Repair Institute, they've had guidelines for surface prep for years. Self-leveling, they've always called for that mid-range of 3 to 6. I mean, look, we don't typically we don't ever really need anybody to get that high with as far as the CSPs. The grinding and the steel shot blasting will typically get you where you need to go, just a light shot blast. Again, you start getting into these more aggressive profiles, that's really more for like the concrete restoration side, and and it's not really where we need to go. But again, if you're getting into, it's just important to make sure you're familiar with what you're doing, that the person doing it is trained properly, because you can make your life a lot more difficult if they go too heavy with this or they're not doing it correctly. But again, these come from ICRI, and so this is not, again, something we just dreamed up. You've probably seen their chipsets. There's those gray rubber chipsets that have the different textures on them. If you've never seen it, you can go online and order it from iCry, but it does a good job of giving a tangible example of what these what these profiles look like and what they feel like as well. So one of the things that's fun is after you shot blast or prep the floor, if you hadn't seen them already, you certainly will at this point, cracks in the floor. So when you're going to go about repairing these, the most important thing with cracks is, are they active? And so if and that is not your job. That is not your job to find that out. That it can only be determined by a design professional. And so if they are no longer active, if it's dormant, then that's something you can more easily work with. But active cracks, if there's a structural issue, that's not a recommendation for you to make. And so that's just something you need to understand, and that the general contractor, the owner, that's their responsibility to prove that, and to have the engineer or the design professional make that call. Look, if it's non-structural, there's lots of simple solutions for filling those. Again, if it's no longer active, you're not expecting movement, and so it cracked at some point along the way, and it did what it was going to do. And so there's lots of different urethanes, epoxies, polyureas out there on the market that you can use. Structural crack repair is it's kind of a different ballgame. The epoxy gravity-fed resins, the port injection, but now again, you're trying to hold on to something you're expecting to move. And so, but these are just, typically you're going to have to do like a sand broadcast into these products to make sure that the leveler can hold on. But those are big challenges, but those are the sorts of things that need to be addressed ahead of time. I mean, on your day in and day out applications, one of your biggest concerns here is going to be your primer. And so again, just like when if you're wondering where we come up with this stuff, or we're just trying to sell you another product, I promise you primers are very important. I don't know that you'll find a manufacturer of these products out there who will tell you that they're not. They serve multiple purposes. So again, it's about getting, we want that substrate as uniform as possible, so that we can have consistency in our bond and across the floor. The off-gassing can be a big issue, especially when you open up a slab. The primer goes down and it forces the air and the gases out of the pores of the concrete, and so that way they're not shooting up through your leveler, and that way it just, again, it makes life a lot easier on the back end. It kind of locks down that surface, gets everything kind of consolidated, and then there's also primers where they're actually designed to give you a texture that helps with the bond. So as far as the types of primers, you're going to see a lot of what's out there are acrylic products. And so these acrylics, typically you can use, a lot of them are multi-purpose. Well, like our primer T, you can use it at full strength, non-diluted, and then but you can dilute it to equal parts with water, or you can even go to 2 parts water to 1 part for really porous substrates. We have, our primer L, which is one that we always dilute for products like gypsum and porous concrete, that you broom it in, and so that it really penetrates in and helps kind of lock down those porous substrates and get rid of all that off-gassing. You see, I mentioned the textured acrylic systems. This is where you're if you've got a non-porous substrate, something that's not textured, there are products, primers that you can put on there that then basically they're designed to bond to a non-porous substrate, like our Primer X, Eco Prim Grip. Then they have a sand aggregate in them though, and so when they dry, it has a very rough texture that you can, that again just gives the leveler, the SLU something to bite and grab hold of when you don't have a profile. Epoxy systems are some of the strongest bonds out there, but they create a very slick surface on the top, and so you're going to usually broadcast sand into that, and then you remove that loose sand once it's cured, and then you have a really aggressive surface that gives you a really good mechanical bond. And then polyurethane systems, similar to some of the epoxy systems, you can broadcast sand into or prime over the top and can help control moisture. So again, there's lots of different primers out there. The most important thing to take away from this is that you need to be using some type of primer. So that should always be a question with what's the right leveler for this application, what's the right primer to go with it. And so just please take that away from this, if nothing else. When it's time to get started, it's really, I think what I want you to remember on this is that the time to plan is before you start mixing. So you want to set up that mixing station as close to the pour as possible, but obviously not in the middle of it, so you're not having to move your mixing station as you go. You want to have everything kind of staged. You don't want a pallet of leveler sitting downstairs, a couple flights and out, in a shed, and you got somebody running back and forth while you're trying to mix. You have them staged, have them cut open, have them, have everything ready. Get your tools laid out, go around the area, and especially when you're doing large areas, you had to do some some kind of math to figure out how many bags you needed. All right, so okay, if I need 3/8 inch over here, I need a 1/4 inch over there. Mark those areas. Mark it on the subfloor so that you can see, and have your gauge rakes already set to those depths, and then make sure everybody knows their role. And so again, where you get into trouble with these products is if you start trying to work out your plan once you've got it mixed out and you're standing there with a bucket full of leveling. And so just plan ahead and it'll go great. So as far as the equipment that's out there, if you're doing a really big project, you may want to use a pump. Pay attention to the instructions for the pump, as well as for the leveler. If you're going to be pumping it, there's usually a minimum linear foot of hose required, because the product is actually being mixed in the hose, and so you can't just have a 10-foot hose attached to it that with levelers shooting out. It's not going to be mixed correctly. So pay attention to that. It's usually over 100 feet. But you've got to make sure the water, the gauges and everything on that are correct, so that your mixes are coming out and it's adding the right amount of water to your powder, and so that you're getting a good mix. If you're barrel mixing, again, how many barrels do you need? You want to make sure it's not a good idea to just pour and then walk back over with your bucket and with your barrel and just keep mixing without paying attention to the fact that the product that's sitting on the inside edges of it starts to cook off, and you're mixing it back into the product. So again, you need to you can only have so many barrels on a project, so you need to kind of clean them as you go, to make sure you're not getting old material mixed in, because that can cause problems for you. But again, it's just, make sure you know what kind of equipment you're using and plan accordingly. The gauge rakes are important. I mean, you set that, again, if you know you need a 1/4 of an inch in an area, you need to have that gauge rake set at a 1/4 of an inch, so that's all that's there. I mean, there are no guarantees with with these products that they don't have a brain, so they don't know that it's only supposed to be 1/4 of an inch. So if you just go dump a bunch of buckets in a big area that needs 1/4 of an inch, you could very easily have more than that there. And so you use it to push it around, push it over high spots into the next low spot, but you're leaving behind what you need to. Make sure you've got your smoothers and spike rollers. Everybody has their own preference. You want to make sure you break that surface tension on the levelers as far as your final placement and smoothing. You can do that with both with both the spike leveler and the smoother. But again, so just make sure you got the right tools and you have them accessible for your group, and have a plan going forward. So when we do see problems with these, generally, if we've got problems with self-levelers, a big one is primer not being used. I can't stress enough, you got to have a primer. And so can it be the wrong primer? Yeah. But honestly, a lot of times what happens is you didn't use the primer correctly. You didn't, if you're on a non-porous substrate and it's cool and kind of damp on site, it's going to take longer for that product to dry. When it's hot on a job site and you've got a porous substrate and you're brooming in diluted primer, I mean, it's going to penetrate in and it's going to dry really quick. But again, if you're working with non-porous substrates and in cooler conditions, you got to make sure you give it time to dry, because you're about to dump a product over the top that has a lot of water in it. And so if you've got a primer that's not fully dry, and just because you can touch it and it doesn't transfer to your finger, doesn't mean it's fully dry. It could have just skinned over. So again, if it says give it 5 hours, give it 5 hours. So, and then obviously, contaminants. And, this is nothing new, just like sticking tile directly to the concrete. You're only as good as what you're bonding to. So if it's if there's, motor oil all over the floor, and if a tile mortar can't stick to it, then self-leveler is not gonna be able to stick to it either. So we talked a little bit about moisture again. This has always been a big issue in the resilient industry and the wood flooring industry. You can have some issues with pH and things like that. Osmotic blistering, that's kind of a unique scenario, but it can cause big problems. And that generally has to do with, that's high levels of salts at the surface that pull water, and it can push, that can push an epoxy moisture barrier off the floor if you have osmotic blistering. But again, it's just making sure you think about it, tile has always been kind of a breathable installation, but now when you're putting really large porcelain tiles down, and then if you're filling your grout joints in with epoxy grout, well, now you don't have a very breathable system anymore. And so it's just one of those things to consider. Just make sure you're aware of the products you're using. And then mixing, again, look, we give you a specific a water ratio to use on these products. Every manufacturer does. Sometimes it's a range. Okay, it might be within a few tenths of a quart or something like that, one end or the other. So obviously you just need to stick within that. And this goes back to kind of planning. It's probably a good idea if you have a specific person assigned to mixing, and keep them doing the mixing, so that it's just so, again, for consistency, so that they're seeing it every time, and they should know, like, hey, something doesn't look right here. This doesn't look like the other ones. I wonder what happened. What are we, identify an issue before you dump it on the floor and let it dry. But again, consistency in the time of mixing, the right tools for mixing. Levelers typically they want a high-speed mixer. That shear that you get is important to activating everything within the mixer, so that within the mix, so that it will perform correctly. Typically we call for something with more than 800 RPM with our SLUs. And then lack of protection. So this is one of those, just being aware of your surroundings and what's going on. Just like we want the subfloor to be consistent all the way across and the conditions on the subfloor, what you don't want is if you've got a space that has big windows on one side of the room, you could have issues where, you know, the sun's coming in and it's heating up a portion of your pour. So that's going to change the way that area dries versus the other areas that aren't getting the sun. You know, so you use paper or whatever, or something to black out the windows in those sorts of instances. The HVAC, you don't want that running while you're pouring and while the product is wet, because that air blowing on those certain areas near the vents you can get like a kind of an alligator skin effect, almost like little waves in the surface, and it changes the drying conditions. And so, but if you have waves, you're not getting a nice flat surface ready for an installation. And then, you know, obviously if the space isn't conditioned, just, you know, understanding, like, you know, how it needs to be protected and kept consistent for a certain period of time, and that's going to vary by the product you use. And so, you know, so I said, I mean, make sure you're using a primer. Make sure you read the product data sheet, so you know. Again, I mean, the new standard calls for, you've got the standard setting mortars, and then you've got the rapid hardening mortars. So what is your timeline? You know, when are you needing to install? Those are all, you know. So, but if you have all those questions answered and up front, I mean, again, these products can save you a lot of time. They can save you a lot of labor. They can, you know, really speed up the entire process of your installation. You know, and they'll give you they will provide for you the substrate you need for today's tile installations. And so I think it's great that the industry took the initiative to put together these standards. And so I know there was a lot of hard work that went into that. And so we appreciate everybody that was involved in that. But they're out there. You can go on, download them, you know, so you have access to them. But with that, that pretty much wraps it up. And so I appreciate your time, and I will turn it back over to Jim.
Good job, Logan. I do want to comment, all the manufacturers that produce and manufacture these products, they do have technical hotlines and email that you can call, and don't hesitate to reach out to them if you have questions, unique questions that you might not have answered normally. If you notice on his thank you page here, it is MAPEI's 85th anniversary this year. It's NTCA's 75th anniversary, so it's nice to celebrate these together. We do have a few questions. So the first one is a question that really relates to our whole industry, and it's been a problem for a long time, and if you could just touch on this, it'd be great. One of our attendees says they do repairs and often hear that the thin set was used to get the tile level. Why doesn't this work?
Yeah, well, so, and, you know, it's one of those topics, like you said, it's been around a long time, and that's kind of always been the shrug your shoulders. Well, you know, for tile guys, oh, well, we'll just fix it with thin set type, you know, attitude that people talk about. Not, you know, and I don't know how real that is, but at the same time, you know, it's tempting, right? I mean, it's really simple when you're trying to, it's the difference between trying to do it right and trying to get off the job. And, you know, and so we know what's going to get us hung up. We know lippage is going to get us hung up, and, you know, and that's an issue. And so when you're trying to get all these tile edges level, it's really tempting to say, all right, well, I'm this far along, you know, so I can just slip a little bit more under this end of the tile, get it all lined up, and all right, move on with life. Now, the challenge though is that what we're looking for is we need a certain amount of coverage on the back of these tiles. You know, anywhere from, you know, depending on what you're doing, 80 to 95%, and, you know, where you're at. And so, that's why we need a flat substrate. I mean, if you have a flat substrate, you're not going to run into these issues where you're needing to, fudge a little by slipping a little bit more thin set under one end of the tile. I mean, that situation is born out of, substrates that aren't flat. And so again, this allows you to achieve the coverage you need easily. You use the right notch trowel, use a 1/2 inch notch trowel or something like that. Once you've got the floor nice and flat with these larger tiles, you break down those ridges and you should have a real consistent, setting bed underneath. And you won't need all that play. You won't, you'll still be able to line up your edges, but you won't have to lift up one end and, pull other parts out of your setting bed.
So Logan, what you just said is absolutely correct. Definitely your substrate prep is the most important part of your installation. Have a nice flat floor. I don't want to say level, but a flat floor that you're going to work on. Thin set is, manufacturers have recommendations how thick a thin set could go. Our industry does. And the reason for that is it shrinks. And if it's got a really good bond to the tile, it can actually crack the tile. Or if the bond isn't that great, it actually will release from the tile and give you a loose tile or hollow sounding tile and create a problem down the line. It's not made for leveling for sure, thin set. So that's great. All right, we have another one here. Is installing SLU or FHCU over single layer 3/4 inch plywood allowed if the plywood is not tongue and groove? Single
Well,
layer 3/4 inch.
So, this, it's going to get back to the overall, so as we look at what we're calling for, so F185, for instance, F185 calls, for a single layer, let's see. Generally we want the tongue and groove because that way you don't have the seams where you're going to lose material down. So again, the biggest thing here though is just keeping. You got to keep your leveler up on level. I mean, otherwise you're going to lose it down through the cracks. And obviously, if it's structurally sound enough. And so, I mean, those are the biggest issues you're running into there.
All right. So let's go here. So a follow-up question to that is, could 3/4 inch single layer not tongue and groove plywood be flattened with a SLU FHSU, then use a uncoupling membrane over that to achieve an acceptable insulation in a light commercial environment?
That's a good question. I'd have to go back and look and see. I mean, so what the standard calls out for is it calls out for Robinson testing for the C627, and so that's where you've got to kind of look, what sort of what can you achieve. And so typically, I mean, when you look at, for instance, F185, it's rated for residential 1 and 2, and so it's kind of on a case-by-case basis as to for the manufacturers which what rating you're going to get.
All right, we might come back to that. So you mentioned it a little bit about trying to figure out what the amount of materials are. Is there an easy way, or is there any kind of anything set up to figure out the amount of materials you need on a job? I mean, obviously, if the floor needs to be flattened, there will be higher areas, lower areas.
Yeah, I mean, we have product calculators on our website, and so certainly, and most manufacturers do. But I mean, the biggest thing is you've got to take the time to go around and check. I mean, so whether that's with your 10-foot screed or how you want to do it, identify, and that's where the mapping comes out, is identify your high spots. And but that's also where some of this comes from, is, well, what do you have one or two high spots that are causing problems that maybe could be ground down? I mean, and and help help alleviate some of these issues, or do you really need to bring, do you have you have multiple areas of low spots, and so you just need to do that mapping. You have to determine how deep, how big of an area, and again, you can use those product calculators in advance to figure out what you need.
When is wire required, like a mesh of some type?
So, so going back to F185, I mean, it talks about it. We've done some testing. We've had good success, and so when I mentioned, we talked about gypsum levelers. We have a product that's gypsum does a really good job of bonding to wood, but then it's fiber reinforced. We've had success with some of our products, with some of our cementitious levelers going over and not using the lath. The lath is there. It adds strength. It adds flexibility. So it's always a good idea if you can use it, because it really helps the installation. I realize it's an additional cost and workaround, but especially if you're concerned at all about, you've got wider joists and you have any concerns about the subfloor you're going over, I would always encourage you to use it. But there are instances where it's okay to prime and not use the lath.
So that would probably be a situation, Logan, where you check with your manufacturer rep and your technical department, and just get there, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Are there different levels of self levelers per a certain spec? How do you know which one meets a higher spec or a higher grade than the other?
Well, I'm not 100% sure what the question is. If you're talking about like compressive strengths, things like that, I mean, there's lots of different factors that people use to compare, levelers. So, the standards. So, for instance, the new 118.16 standard has a minimum PSI of 3,000 or 20.7 megapascals after 28 days. And so we have products that can be used as a topping. Now, again, one of the caveats to this whole conversation is these are all underlayments, right? These are all products that are designed to go under a floor. These are not designed to be wear layers. And so we have products that can be used as both as an underlayment and as a topping that have higher compressive strengths. And there's value in, for, as far as if you're looking to have something be a wear layer or put a thin application of epoxy or something like that coating on the top. But for tile, I mean, again, you've got a minimum of 3,000 psi compressive strength for the standard, and then it's really more of a question of drying time. I mean, again, they've got the two different. They differentiate by, can you install the next day or can you install within a few hours? I mean, that's really kind of the big differentiating factors here, and then I guess you can also compare the prep requirements. Does it need a CSP? Does it not need a CSP of 2 to 3? Different products have different requirements.
So really what we're saying, though, and I'm going to keep saying this, but check with your manufacturer of the product you want to use. Let them know what you're trying to do and what kind of requirements are being asked of the tile installer to make sure it's there. And really, right to go along with that, the next question is really one that I have from years of being in this business, but do you have separate standards for going over gypsum-based underlayment? Are there special kinds of SLUs, or what do you think of that, Logan?
So with gypsum, you can use our, so again, we have gypsum-based self-leveling products, but you can also use our cementitious products. And so we have to have a primer in between the two. And so when our primer L or our primer T diluted, broomed into the gypsum product, and then you can pour over that.
That is exactly what I was taught when years ago, is dilute the primer, pour it into, brush it into the gypsum, and then you can go over that later. So that's great. Let's see what else we got here. Instead of checking the floor with a 10-foot straight edge, when will you get topographic maps instead of a FF rating that is not necessarily correct? It would allow for accurate change orders for SLU. I'm not sure I quite understand that. Do you, Logan?
Not sure. Well, I mean, if there's, look, if you've got the equipment to do it, I mean, if you're going to be bidding big jobs, it's something, to look into, I suppose. Or you want to hire somebody to find that out for you. I mean, it's possible the GC will do it. I don't know if it's written into the contract, but obviously that's pretty low tech going around with your 10-foot screed. We're dealing with a little bit of everybody, I'm sure, out there in the audience. I mean, as to what kind of jobs you're doing. But I mean, again, these products have kind of, they're used in residential installations now on a daily basis as well as commercial. So, obviously a 10-foot screed makes sense in some, when you're checking a couple rooms, a few hundred square feet. But I mean, yeah, if you've got a big project that you've got big concerns on, I mean, yeah, that's where you probably want to use some of that technology again, keep you off your hands and knees trying to map out thousands of square feet.
And I think, it's like our whole world. There's more and more technical equipment. It'll probably become more and more prevalent and available as we move forward. But I don't think there's a real answer as to when will we get to that point. So that's a tough one.
Yeah. Well,
all right.
Somebody's got an app for it or something, but who knows?
Yeah, exactly. They might. We would have to look into that. What's a good solution for large lifts? For example, leveling a basement that slopes to a drain from, say, 0 to 3 inches. Is it best to add pebbles or use a combination of dry pack leveler?
So dry pack leveler, if you're talking about mud there, I mean, really that's up to you. Obviously you can extend these products with aggregate. The challenge becomes, so you still got to prime the subfloor. You're gonna have to weigh out your pea gravel, typically 3/8 pea gravel. Get it out on the substrate. You can mix it in the bucket with it, but that creates real challenges. And then when you dump it out, they all just go into a pile anyways, and you're going to end up spreading them around. So that the other challenge is if you, guys will lay them out in rows, and so that once they pour, they, pull them over into the wet material. And, the idea is you got to make sure they get good and coated. And so again, so that's, you certainly can extend them by aggregate, but if you've never done it, I mean, it can be a challenge. And so, you can do it in multiple lifts. Again, if you've got a rapid setting, a rapid hardening product, then, you could be doing another lift there within a couple hours. You just need to prime in between lifts and, bring it up. There are products on the market. I mean, we have our NovaPlan DPL, which you can pour up to 4 inches. But again, just be prepared. I mean, that's a lot of material when you're going that deep, and you just gotta have kind of a plan in place to handle it.
So in that situation, if they're pouring to a slope, to a drain, I mean, it might be better off to use a dry pack, right?
Sure, you could. I mean, if you want to look, if you want to mud it, look, if you can, what you'll see guys do now though is they use like the spray foam insulation, and so they'll spray that around the drain, and so to kind of block everything off. And and then you just, at that point, you're kind of filling a bird bath, but again, it is a lot to work with. So look, if you can work quickly and want to do, there's lots of dry pack, rapid setting dry pack products, as well, that won't slow you down if you're in a hurry. So again, it can be done, but I would just say I wouldn't want that to be my first experience with an SLU.
Right.
We'd be trying to do something, that deep. But and then the other thing, especially if you're in basements, again, just check to make sure you know what the moisture sensitivity of these products. How it gets in basements at times, and so you just want to probably look into some products that are not moisture sensitive.
All right. How do you recommend carrying an expansion joint through SLU?
Well, the true expansion joint, I would say what you probably want to do there is just dam it off, and so that you pour right up to it and stop, and then, you've got to leave it open. It's going to crack, if you, and it's going to cause you problems. So, it's an expansion joint. It's got to be honored through the installation. So, again, what I see most people using now is spray foam. That it's just an easy way for them to run a kind of create a dam, and as long as you're not going crazy, being too rough around it, it stays in place. You pour right up next to it, get your depth you need, and then it pops out pretty easily afterwards.
Okay. The gentleman that was asking about single level plywood that's not, what am I trying to say? Anyhow, he says there's no approved TCNA handbook method for that type of an installation, and he was just wondering if a manufacturer would warranty an untongue and grooved installation like that. Would MAPEI?
No, no. Look, again, we're always willing to look at things on a case-by-case basis. We stick to the TCNA handbook. I'm just telling you, there's a lot of challenges if it's not. If they're not using the right products to build out the substrate, it's going to be difficult to be successful. And so, like we stick pretty tight to the handbook. But again, there's other challenges as well there if that's not if they haven't used tongue and groove.
Okay, so there's quite a few people still on here, and I want everyone to know again, if you'd like to review this or share this webinar within 72 hours, this will be on the NTCA YouTube page, and you can go on there and look at it as many times as you want, share it with whoever you want, so it will be available for you. We have one last question here, and I think this is more of an opportunity, but how can an SLU manufacturer rep help a company solve problems?
Well, it's difficult to hand somebody our product brochure and and you flip open to the self-leveling underlayment section and you see 8 or 9, 10, and maybe even 12 or 13, 14 different products. Some of these products get really nichey as far as and maybe you're not maybe not for necessarily every application, but really what it is just about educating, identifying the most versatile products that that really fit the needs, because everybody has their own needs, right? What type of work do you typically do? Are you more geared towards residential or commercial? What are the substrates you're typically working over? What's the what primer? What would be the most versatile primer for you to have, so that again you're not having to reinvent the wheel every time you need to use a self-leveler. And so really that would be probably the biggest benefit in my mind, is just making really kind of talking through and evaluating what your needs are on a day-to-day basis, and finding the simplest most practical solution for you to to stock and have ready to roll and train your guys on, so that they're familiar with it. And and like I said, again, you're not it's not some big mystery every project. You're doing the same thing over and over.
All right, Logan, that was very informational. I want to thank everyone for attending today. That's almost an hour and a half, hour and 20 minutes, and lots of information there. So again, go to the NTCA YouTube page and review it, share it. It will be there. We archive them. We've got 2 or 3 years of webinars on there for you. Appreciate all of you taking all this time to be here with us. Our next webinar will be on March 15th. We're actually going to have a contract lawyer on site and talking about contracts and answering questions in regards to that. So that'll be March 15th. Look for your invite soon. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Logan. I appreciate all your time.
Thank you, Jim. Have a great day.
All right, bye, everyone.